All right. Well, it says that I'm online, but I know it always takes a minute before it actually gets started. I'm going to pull up the chat room while I'm waiting. Oh, look at that. Hey, hello, chat room. I think the video is a little bit delayed. I'm saying hi to someone in the chat room, but I don't see my video on my device. Hmm. Okay, all right, good. So my video apparently is live. Good, good, good. All right, so tonight we are talking about Bootstrap. It's only week 3, but this is a pretty remarkable unit because once you learn how to use Bootstrap, you will be able to design web pages remarkably fast, faster than you've ever designed before. And you'll get to either use templates or use pieces, components of a layout that you've probably been wanting to make on your own already before. If you browse the web, you're going to see, or you're going to start to see many websites use Bootstrap to design their front page or maybe their entire site. And I want to give you at least 2 weeks of practice for this because it's going to be part of your midterm project. But already in next week, I'll be introducing some reasons why you might not want to use Bootstrap. And it kind of stems from the fact that because everyone uses Bootstrap, maybe it's not the best thing for you to rely upon. But this week, I can tell you with full honesty that I would not be where I'm at as a web designer if it was not for Bootstrap. So it is a valuable tool. And if Bootstrap is on your resume or if you want to freelance, Bootstrap is something that is going to be invaluable for you as someone who's either maintaining websites that are already using it or someone that needs to make a website really quickly. This week in Moodle is structured a little bit differently than you might be accustomed to from the Web 1 class. There is a component of independent learning this week because Bootstrap is not introduced in our textbook. Instead of picking a specific version of Bootstrap and showing it in a book that might be published for a few years, the author focused on core CSS concepts. And really, Bootstrap is a project from a company. I think it started originally from Twitter. There was a design group at Twitter who needed to be able to build prototypes and apps quickly on the web. So they put together essentially some CSS classes that they found themselves using a lot, and they shipped it as Bootstrap version 1. Each version of Bootstrap has been around for a long time. In fact, when I taught this class last year, we were just talking about using Bootstrap 4. So this is only like the second year of using this particular version of Bootstrap 4. Before that, I had taught with Bootstrap 3 for at least 2 years as well. So they last a long time. So what you practice with today, you can apply for quite a while. So at the top of week 3 in Moodle, right above the Bootstrap content is the first topic that I actually want to talk about, and that's the viewport tag. You may have noticed that in the first couple of quizzes, I made a big deal about the viewport tag, and I wanted to show it with you, or show it to you tonight, because if you forget the viewport tag on the Bootstrap projects that you build, the site won't work correctly on a mobile phone. So if you give me a second here, I'm going to try to pull up my phone on screen. Hopefully that's showing up. Unfortunately, I can't be in the chat room and have this on display. So let me switch back real quick. Yeah, okay. I think everything's working. Say something in the chat room if it's not working, and I'll check back in a second. So this is my real phone here. You're probably used to browsing websites on your phone and being able to read the text and scroll up and down without needing to zoom in, but it wasn't always like this on mobile devices. In fact, I still remember the day that Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone. This is the closest I've been able to come to the screenshot of something that he pulled up on screen in front of the audience when he introduced the iPhone. He went to the real New York Times website and it loaded fast. I was used to, iPods at the time, which didn't even have a full color display that could show like web pages, and what loaded immediately was the real New York Times website that you would see on the desktop. Now you'll notice that you can see the photo and you can kind of read the headlines, but you even in the screenshot you can't actually read the articles. So the iPhone, the very first version of the iPhone, came with the ability to scroll in or zoom in to be able to read content. And what that looks like is kind of like this experience here. So here's a viewport page example that I made up. This page does not have the viewport tag. So the default behavior on the iPhone to this day is still to assume that this web page is probably designed for a desktop size. And so it tries to assume that the page width of the browser window should be, I don't know, something like 1,000 pixels wide, somewhere around in there. And so what it does is it zooms the content down so you can see all of it on the screen, because that was a good experience at the time. However, it wasn't very long after that that people started thinking, if they're coming to my website on a mobile phone and they're going to go shopping or they're going to read articles, we probably don't want them to click a link and then have to zoom in repeatedly over and over and over again. And particularly when you're reading articles, you found yourself having to scroll over left to right, which was really a bummer. So Apple actually, I think, helped introduce the viewport tag. It's a meta tag, and it tells it hints to the browser, and the browser hints to the web page that it is able to be shown full screen and zoomed in. So it overrides the default behavior of assuming that it's 1,000 pixels wide, and instead sets the width of the web page to be usually what the width of the device is. So what does that mean? Let me go back to our Moodle page. If you read what this meta tag does, so the meta tag is a single tag that goes in the head, the top metadata part of a web page. It's not shown on screen. It does affect how the page is shown, but there's no wording that appears on the web page when you put a meta tag in. There are different meta tags that you can provide. I honestly can't think of another one that I use right now except for the viewport tag. So you tell the browser what you're trying to change. That's the viewport. And the content of the meta tag are kind of like the configuration values for this thing that you're telling the browser to change. So it's explaining to the browser that you should set the width of the viewport to the device width, the width that the screen has. And the device width is not like 1,000 points wide. It's usually, I think the original iPhone was 320 pixels wide. Now we're probably up to like 400 or 500 pixels wide, depending on what size phone you have. And not only does it set the width, but there's this important comma here. You have to tell it where to start. Don't start all zoomed in. Set the initial scale to just 1.0. Like, I think if you control this initial scale, you can tell it to zoom out, you can tell it to zoom in, you can do various things. But this is what I am so familiar with typing. I think if you're in Visual Studio Code and you start a new HTML page, it automatically does this. Let's just see if that's true. Yep, right here is that tag that I just read aloud from Moodle. What I think is interesting is when we take a look at Bootstrap, the starter file that you download, their meta viewport tag is just a little bit different. They include shrink to fit on the end. They include shrink to fit. Oh, sorry. I'm checking the chat room to see if there's a question. I didn't know what shrink to fit did, so I actually just copied it and I went over to my favorite google.com and searched for shrink to fit. And I got some good denim jeans results. So we're going to search for viewport on top of that. Now as I browse the web the next week, I'm probably going to get ads for jeans. That's going to be wonderful. So the first response to shrink to fit viewport or shrink to fit CSS is actually a Stack Overflow article. And it occurs to me that you may not have ever stumbled upon a Stack Overflow article officially yet. But if you find yourself Googling any HTML tag or CSS property, you're going to see Stack Overflow come up in the results. Stack Overflow is like a forum where instead of posting threads on topics, you actually just ask a question and people can answer your question. And the best answer, depending on who votes for it, is going to be kept up to the top. It's a great community, and I actually work with some people that have tried to answer questions on Stack Overflow, which is pretty cool. I know that as I search for help with code and CSS and basically everything I do at my job, Stack Overflow, I visit probably 12 times a week at least, easily. So anyway, Shrink to Fit. It was introduced, I think, because of a change in Safari 9, or maybe before Safari 9. I'm not really sure, but it looks like from what I read that if the content is actually wider than the width of the device by default, it will try to shrink everything back down again. And so I didn't really understand what that meant until I mocked up yet another prototype on this Viewport site. So let me pull it back up here. There's this without viewport that we looked at. There's the with viewport. I have a warning about wide elements. It looks like if you include a really wide image, like I include the same image but much wider, if it shrinks or if it goes off screen, you still do not quite have a responsive website here because you have to scroll around. I think that shrink to fit no is important to prevent the browser from doing any additional zooming when the page loads like this. So I could probably take another look at this in Chrome. If I go to this viewports page and I take a look at the warning page with the web inspector, let me zoom it up here. I'll select something in here and open up the head. Yeah, so I don't include that shrink to fit no in the code on this example. So the viewport tag is very hard to troubleshoot and figure out if it's working or not working. That's at least on a desktop when you have the web inspector in front of you. Like if I click around between the without viewport and the with viewport, the desktop browser, it makes no difference because the viewport is the width of the browser window. It's really when you get to a mobile device where it's more sensitive to the viewport tag not being there, which is why I asked so much about it on the quiz. I just want to keep reiterating to you that as you work on your projects, finding a way to test it on your phone is going to be important. One thing that you can do if you can't publish it to the web is maybe to put it up on CodePen. I think we did that last semester because then you could visit your CodePen on your phone and then get to the preview site and try browsing around. And then you can take a look at how it behaves on your phone. I will say that I have noticed subtle differences between how mobile Chrome and mobile Safari handle this. So if you're on an Android device, I don't know what the assumption is when you go to a web page that doesn't have the viewport tag. I had a student show me one time, and I think it probably varies by Android version, but when they browsed between the without viewport and the with viewport, they didn't see as remarkable as a difference. So each browser maker might have a default width that's different. So I hope I've covered the viewport sufficiently well. Let me close my phone here. Are there any lingering questions about the viewport tag? I promise there will still be someone that, even though I've talked about the viewport like every week since the beginning, they will forget that and wonder why it doesn't work right on their phone about partway through the semester. So I know I still do that when I'm mocking up new web pages for mid. I'll think I've got an awesomely or responsively designed website, and then I show it to someone on a mobile device, and I feel embarrassed because it's all zoomed out and not what I wanted. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room, so I'm going to keep moving on here. Let's go to the Bootstrap official documentation site. If you haven't browsed this site yet, you need to get to know it. And it's probably one of the best documentation sites I've ever used. We're going to start on the Getting Started page. We're going to go through an example of building a quick Bootstrap page. What I do want to point out is just how everything's laid out and how the navigation works. this left-hand side has the major sections of the documentation, and then on the right-hand side is like an inner nav bar for the different sections on the page. Remember how you can have fragments in a web page where you can make links that jump down? So like right here, if I click on starter template, this page actually didn't go forward or backward to a different page. It actually jumped me down. It scrolled me down this section. So this is the same page, but clicking on the links to the right allow you to jump down, which is pretty sweet. When you use the navigation on the left-hand side, however, you're actually navigating between different pages. So if you go to the download page, this is where you can download some prepackaged Bootstrap examples or the source code that they use to build Bootstrap. If you scroll down further on the left and you click on layout, this is something that I hope to talk about quite a bit tonight, the layout section, because this is honestly the one page that I have to spend the most time on when we're designing stuff at mid with Bootstrap. What I love about Bootstrap's documentation is it's very visual. Yeah, there's code, but the code is there to show you what the visualization is doing. So as we're trying to learn how to lay things out with Bootstrap and use its inner grid system, you're going to see example code and then right above it see what that code looks like. And there's even copy buttons on any snippet of code. So if you see something that you want to use, like let's go into components here and pick out a card. If you wanted to make an example of a card that looks like this, it has a place for an image, a heading, a description, and a button. If you don't want to have to retype that out, you can click copy, and in your clipboard you now have a working example that you can paste into your code. It's going to have some of those placeholders that you need to replace with your own content, but it has the HTML tags that you need, and it has, most importantly, the classes that relate to a feature of Bootstrap that has been built for you. So I'm going to undo that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the documentation has a search interface. So I had a student ask me what I meant by like code highlighting. So I think I just typed in code over here in the left-hand side, and then you can use your arrows to navigate up and down. It's a lot like using Atom or using Visual Studio Code. So if you wanted to go into the code section, you can hit enter, and they have a whole page about styling code. This is an example of using the code tag. It's an HTML tag surrounding a sample HTML tag that you want to display, and what the code tag does when you have Bootstrap included on your web page is turn anything that should be code into like a monospaced font, so all the letters are the same width, and then also changes it to pink, which is nice, especially on this documentation site. They have so many different examples of writing out an HTML tag in the docs that they use their styling from Bootstrap to make those stand out. And it's a lot easier to read through the page. So that's one aspect of your Bootstrap challenge that you'll have to do is use code. And there's different ways to do this. If you just have like one section or one short line that you're trying to highlight as code, the code tag is great. But if you have a section of code that you're trying to display, like this Bootstrap example does right here, this is actually built with the pre-tags. This is actually built with the pre-tags. So the HTML code for this would be a pre-tag, and then you can put code around here and actually type in multiple lines of sample code all right there. Okay. There's lots of other cool things in this code page that you can look at later. You can make cool little keyboard shortcut tags around things, and it actually makes it look like a keyboard shortcut that would appear in the menu of like a Mac or Windows. Just amazingly cool stuff. Let's get back to the getting started page. So I told you that the Bootstrap is a CSS library. It's really more than that because a lot of their components that they provide you also have interactivity, so they add some JavaScript in here. But it comes from people that were trying to make web apps where they needed to have a login form, they needed to show multiple columns of information, they needed to basically build a version of Twitter. And so when they were making these prototypes, they realized that rather than have to write the CSS over and over and over again, it would be nice if those were saved into classes that you could use, or that there's default styling applied to their projects. And that's how Bootstrap was really born. If you want to use it in your project, you can adopt any number of those components. You can adopt just a CSS, You can adopt all the JavaScript required, and then you're able to use those classes. You don't have to write a single line of CSS to make a website that looks like what you're seeing on the screen now. It includes so many cool things, including nav bars. All the navigation on this page has been built with Bootstrap itself. So this left sidebar that has nav on, vertically, you can do that with Bootstrap. The nav over here that has a line on it, the nav bar at the very top. This is like the typical nav bar that you will see on so many websites where there's buttons on the right, links on the left, there might be a logo. It's really easy to build a nav bar in Bootstrap if you use the tags for nav and you use the classes that they show you in their example. So that's the goal. Let's try to build something. I'm on the introduction. We're going to read the quick start section. They tell you the pieces that you need to have in your HTML document. So that, like right here is the CSS style sheet that we need to include. They host it on this Bootstrap CDN content delivery network site. So if you wanted to add this to your web page, you just click copy. So I'm going to bounce over to Visual Studio Code here. We delete all this again. We just need a basic HTML document, and we're going to call it Bootstrap Demo. And instead of using this main.css that Visual Studio gave us, I'm going to paste in the code from the Bootstrap site to use their CSS. And I'm going to get rid of this JavaScript that was put in here by Visual Studio. Let's save it here. Okay, we made a quick Bootstrap demo. It's not going to have JavaScript. Let's do something like give an H1 in here that says welcome to my Bootstrap demo, and let's make a paragraph and say this is an example of the code styling in action, and I'm going to put some sample code here. I love, and then we're going to say opening and closing code tags. And in order for me to actually write a code tag in here, it's like some real HTML tags, I need to actually turn that into HTML entities. So I'm going to write ampersand less than, I think is the less than sign, and then HTML, and then ampersand greater than, GT semicolon. Atom thankfully has these autocompletes that are pretty nice. Not Atom, Visual Studio. I'm sorry, I just did the Web 1 live stream yesterday, so I keep saying Atom. All right, so I'm going to save this. It really isn't that pretty of a page, but it has the all-important viewport tag. It has the Bootstrap style sheet, and it has an H1 and a paragraph with an example of the code tag in it. We need to open this file up in a browser. Double click on it. And I think it's working. I've got this H1, which looks like a normal H1, except look at the font. It's not the typical default font. I think it's usually something like Times New Roman or some serif font. Bootstrap is a more modern looking appearance by default, so they use a sans serif font. If you power up your web inspector, and I hide my head because it's in the way here, if I choose this little grabber and I take a look at the H1 and I go through the styles that are listed on the right hand side, at some point here we're going to see that some fonts were inherited from this body selector. This came from a file called reboot style sheet from Bootstrap. We did not write any of this, but you'll see that by default a font is provided. And now I'm trying to guess what font actually won out. So font family, I see a lot of crossed out fonts. Let's go to the computed tab and search for font. So font family, the one font that won out is what? That's not what I wanted. So it's inheriting the font. I think it must be inheriting one of these fonts in this list. I just am surprised that it's crossed out. All right, well, if you can figure out what font that is by default, tell me in the Slack chat room or in the Twitch chat room, and I will make sure to share it with the rest of the class. So beyond the font, maybe we choose a paragraph tag. Is that going to tell me what font this is? Yeah, okay, this font is it is winning out. So it's one of these fonts. It could be the Apple System font, whichever one is the first one that actually is available. I think it's probably one of these three here. The Roboto or Helvetica Neue, or Arial, or one of these by default. Now, of course, you could write your own CSS to override that, but this is just, the only thing I've added is Bootstrap. I've not written a single line of CSS. I'm using their tag styles, their element styles, and we're going to take advantage of some classes here in a minute too. So let me bounce back to Visual Studio Code. That's looking good. Let's add the other pieces that are required. If you want to take advantage of their interactivity, you need to include these JavaScript files. Again, you can just hit copy. And they do, I think they either recommend putting these at the bottom of the file. Yeah, it says place the following scripts near the end of your pages right before the closing B tag. So they tell you the order to put it, and it's usually right before the closing B. The reason that you would put these down at the end of the page is so that when someone visits your web page and they refresh it like this, it will try to display all of the content first before it tries to fetch that JavaScript. So your web page will show up faster, which is always nice, before the JavaScript kicks in. And you might have to remind me. I'm pretty sure that's how we did it in Web 1 when we wrote our own JavaScript, but I could be wrong. So that's it. I created a Bootstrap page. Now, you don't want to have to do that every single time. So I have taken this starter template and provided that within Moodle. So if we go back to the front page of Moodle, there is this Bootstrap 4 starter file that you can download and use for your project, for your midterm. You can actually use that to get started. Hopefully it'll save you some time. In fact, I am going to take their starter one more time myself, paste it in here so that we can keep building. Let me go back to my web page, make sure that it refreshes. Yeah, there we go. There's Hello World. All right, so now that we have the libraries, what can we make? Let's get started and talk about content. So there are a lot of page defaults and fonts that are provided. Right here they tell you those fonts that we looked at in the web inspector and which ones might be used on various devices that have the fonts. What Bootstrap provides is some default styling for just about any HTML element you could use. Obviously all the headings, but also lists. So if you wanted to make a list that is unordered or ordered, they apply some styling and some indentation for you if you were to use nested lists. But what I love even more about lists is you can actually add classes to the list. I'm going to search for a list, because they have a class that you can add to a list to get rid of the bullet points. Where is the example? Did I scroll by it? If I go to components, do they have a list? They have list groups. That's not what I want. Maybe it's underneath the utilities. Yeah, list unstyled is what I'm thinking about. So there's this class that they provide called list unstyled. Let's make a couple lists in here. Let's make like a H3. No, I guess we need an H2 next, and make like a favorite colors page, and I'm gonna make a UL with li times 5. Let's see if I did the emmet right. There we go. So I got an unordered list with 5. You know what? 5's overkill. We just need 3. So we need the best 3: red, green, blue. So if I save that and go back to my web page, there's my unordered list. I could change that to an OL, and then it's numbered. What I love about the unordered list, though, is if I wanted to just make it a list that doesn't have bullet points, they have that list-unstyled class, which they use in so many other components. that applies all the CSS you need to get rid of the bullet points and get rid of the indentation, which is extremely handy. They use unordered lists like this inside of nav bars and inside of, I think we were on this media object page. So like this is a list of thumbnails and descriptions and headings. In order to add that to your page, you add just a few classes. So like we have an unordered list that we added list unstyled to, and then we apply .media to any of the LIs. So this is a class that we can add to the LIs. Let's give that a shot. Let's make one of these a media element. So they have a list type of media, and then inside each list they have an image, and then they have certain classes that you can use to have a media body and a heading. So I'm going to steal this for a second and paste it in here instead of red. So we're going to call it red. Red is universal. Let's save that. So I guess an image would indent that nicely, but we've now created a pretty common design that you've seen on websites before, where you'll have an image with some margin on the right, and then you will have a heading and a description right there. So if you wanted to see how to do that, we made the unordered list, we made the list items, we just need some images in there. They have these helper classes for margins. So mr-3 means add some margin to the right. 3 of the margins, 3 units, usually 3 pixels or 3 points like that. It's really, really fast to design something that looks like this, which would be great for a resume or great for a restaurant site. You know, if you're making a menu for a restaurant, you might have photos and then descriptions of each dish on the right. So let's get back to getting started. Or content is what we were on. So I showed you headings. We talked about lists. Tables. You can spend a lot of time exploring how tables work in Bootstrap. By default, if you add .table to a class, it kind of gets rid of borders and padding by default. It kind of resets the table to be plain. And then there's a whole section in the documentation about tables, about how to make them look really cool with headings on the top or left. My favorite is adding something like the table dart class to invert it. Or I think they even have options for highlighting a specific row. Or I was hoping that they still have the example where as you move over, they have striping. There's one example where if you hover over a row, it highlights it. Of course, they have borderless tables. Man, this is extremely detailed. Hoverable rows. There we go. So now as I hover over each row, it highlights. I know a lot of people ask me how to do that. You can write the CSS for it, or you can structure a table like this. So by writing a table with a class of table and then table hover, you naturally gain that superpower on your tables. So I'm going to copy this example over into Visual Studio Code. If I come back and refresh my web page, I now have a table that has this cool hover effect on the rows. The next section that we should probably take a look at are figures. Figures are great for images and captions. There's certain classes that can help you with that. Oh, and you know what? We skipped over the images section. If you want to have a website have an image that resizes to fill the screen that's available, you can add a class to the image called image fluid. You can also add classes to add like an outline or like a border around it. You can push images to the left or right just by adding float-left and float-right. You can round the corners of your images. So much cool stuff that I want you to explore. So you need to spend some time reading through the documentation and look at what I've been doing this whole time. I've just copied the code that has interested me. I pasted it in, and I've gone and I've taken a look at what it looks like on my own browser. So I think now's a good time, Zenny, to talk about the Bootstrap Challenge. This is going to be a 2-week project. This week, it's all about getting some basics, getting Bootstrap set up in your file. Start with that template that I gave you. Add in a variety of elements that Bootstrap provides styling for. So I've already shown you headings, some body text, some inline styling like the code example. I guess that's actually number 5. You can create lists, block quotes, addresses, that alignment that I showed you for going to the left or right. There are helper classes for transforming case. So I know that it's pretty common for headlines to be written in all caps. Under the hood, in the HTML, if you take a look at the web inspector, oftentimes that's not typed all caps by the author of the web page. They actually use a CSS property to transform it uppercase. You don't have to write that CSS. You can just add a special class to make something uppercase, which is really handy. I want you to explore a lot of those styling options that are given in Bootstrap 4 and apply a bunch of them to some content. All that you have to do is build one web page. The content is also up to you. I'm not going to specify too much about what it is. I do recommend that you build a page for like a business, an organization, or one about yourself. But it's just one page, okay? You might eventually add a nav bar. Let's see, is that a requirement? Yeah, but the 10th requirement is to include a nav bar, but the navigation could have links to external websites, or it could have links that jump you down on the page. So you don't have to build more than one Bootstrap page. This is just to practice and explore what Bootstrap has to offer. You are expected to add a table, and it can't just be a table with one class called table. You have to actually explore some of those classes that I scrolled through a little bit ago. Make some striped rows, make them hoverable. You can do a lot of cool things. The sections that you're going to need to spend the most time on are tables, navigation, and if we go into components, you'll see a lot of things that you might want to include. This is where you can see navs in the nav bar. Here we go. Buttons and button groups and forms. I am going to ask that you build a form in your example. It could be a contact form. Look at the beautiful forms that Bootstrap creates. They're big and beautiful. You can click on the label password, and it takes you to this field that you can type in. It has a blue outline. It's very accessible. What's tricky about Bootstrap forms is just how much markup is required. If you want to make a certain type of a form like this, where each input is on a different line, then you need to wrap each question essentially on the form in a form group. So this is where we start to have so many divs that you've seen on other web pages. They'll surround one single form input with its label inside of a form group control. Now, that's not the only type of form that you can build. I know that a lot of people prefer more compact forms, so you can change the form input sizes. You can do an inline form. This is what I wanted to show here. So instead of like email and password being on top of each other here, they put email and password side by side and a button to the right of it. So this is an inline form. They have lots of examples of how to design those. I think that even the checkboxes have a beautiful design thanks to Bootstrap. If you wanted your checkboxes all in one line, they have classes that allow you to do that too. Form-check-inline. You can disable some of these inputs if you want, make them read-only. When we start talking about layout and grid, you'll notice that you can actually lay out the form inputs side by side. And this is where I wanted to show off probably the one website that we have that uses the most standard Bootstrap available is our admissions app. So if I go to our admissions app and I click apply now on one of these forms that appears, if I click start application, this was built with Bootstrap 3, I believe. So not the version that we're using now, but we're able to actually lay this out so that the questions appear side by side in different sections. And if you power up your web inspector, you can get a feel for the classes that we used. So as I hover over this, this is one form group. You can see how many columns wide it is. And you can hover your cursor over here to see all the classes that are on here, like the help block. Now, like I said, this was an older version of Bootstrap, so it's not going to be comparable. Oh, thank you. Sweet. My voice was getting hoarse, and now I have tea. I love live streaming. You know what? I had in a course evaluation result that I needed more corgis in this semester. So I want everyone to notice that I am drinking from a corgi mug. The corgis, however, are sleeping right now, which is nice. This is a older version of Bootstrap, so I don't know if you can actually lift the class names from here and expect them to work with Bootstrap 4. They simplified a lot of things in Bootstrap 4, which is really nice. But I want to give you a feel for what these forms can look like. They can be very complex, and they can be organized into multiple sections. Okay, so let's get back to the assignment here. So this is where you can see that if you need a button, Bootstrap offers buttons. It's this entire section about components that I think you're absolutely going to love. I had a lot of students who wanted to make a photo gallery for their portfolio site. You could build one for this project with just a little bit of code. You put in the images and they'll slide around. You can add all sorts of controls for going left and right. And as long as you have their CSS and JavaScript, you get this styling for free. You can show like which image you're on. That's something that we all love to do with sliders. You can add the captions in. If you don't like their default animation, you can go with a fade. So look at those examples. Try to put some cool components together. Something that we use a lot. I'm trying to remember what they call it. Collapse. They call it collapse. When we built this in Web 1, we called them hide-a-boxes. Rather than have to write JavaScript for this, you can just add certain classes and data toggle attributes to your HTML. And when you click on these buttons or these links, they expose more content. So it's like a hide-a-box, only done with Bootstrap. Oh, someone in the chat room said the live stream with puppies needs to happen. I'll tell you what, when we get to the midterm and we're doing conferences, I'm okay keeping the dogs out at that point in time. They get a little rambunctious during these normal live streams, and it distracts me more than it distracts you as viewers. So that's why I put them away for the live stream. But they will make an appearance at least once this semester, I promise you. So yeah, lots of cool components in here. You need to play around with Bootstrap. Now, how are you going to learn all this on your own? You can read the documentation. I know that sometimes even if you see an example and you read how it's supposed to work, this is written mostly by the people that developed it, so it might not be the best resource. I have 2 suggestions this week in Moodle for independent learning. One is the lovely lynda.com. If you want someone to show you how to use every aspect of Bootstrap better than I'm doing right now, you can join Ray Vlablos, I think is his name, and I want to say that this course is a ridiculously in-depth, long. I'm going to guess 7 hours? I might actually be guessing low. It might be more than 7 hours. Oh, you know what? That link did not work for me. Let's try that again. Go to Bootstrap 4 Essential Training. Waiting for Lynda to load. Here we go. Oh, I said 7. It's only 5 hours, 57 minutes. Look at that. You could get that done this week. But it's broken into sections that I think if you're looking for specific help on how to do one of the requirements of the project, you can find a 5 to 10 minute video clip here in lynda.com. I know that lynda.com is not what everyone likes to use, so I tried to find another resource. And if you Google around for Bootstrap tutorials, you'll find a lot of them out there. What I was looking for was something that was a bit more interactive as an option. So I love Free Code Camp. I think I've mentioned them in the past before. I promise I'll link to them again coming up, but I found out that they had sponsored someone to build an interactive Bootstrap tutorial. So learn Bootstrap 4 for free. These are videos and recordings, but they're also a code editor all at once. So if you want to learn how to build a table, you can play this video, but underneath it all, this is actually code that I am selecting. He's not selecting it in the video. I can actually add whatever I want in here with some autocomplete. It's not as nice as Visual Studio or Atom, but I can type code in here, and over here on the right, I think I'll get a preview. So this might be an interesting way for you to play around with Bootstrap as well. That is definitely an option. In fact, I would love to hear some feedback from you if you choose one and decide you don't like it and try the other. In your journal this week, you need to keep track of how you're learning. Summarize what you're learning, what resources you're using, what goes well, what's still a challenge, what challenges you overcame, what you learned. Those are the types of things that I'm looking for in this independent learning journal. In fact, I can click on the assignment here. I do have some prompts in here like a normal journal. Like, what is Bootstrap in your own words? You need to tell me how you understand Bootstrap and what it can do for you. I think as you go through some of these resources, you're going to see what the most commonly used HTML and tags and CSS classes are on a Bootstrap page. Give me an example of some of the code you wrote, and then I ask you specifically how to build a nav bar, and what's your favorite Bootstrap feature that you learned about. So that's one of your assignments this week. And then you're going to be applying what you learn to make this awesome Bootstrap challenge page. So are there any questions about Bootstrap? I do have one more topic about Bootstrap that I'd love to go into, but it's not critical that we do it this week. If it waits until next week, that's okay too. I'm going to sip on my hot tea while I wait for questions. Oh, that tea is hot. Crickets in the chat room. Ask one more time here. Oh, good. I answered the questions that someone had. That is always exciting to hear. Okay, so before I let you go, we've already been here for about 45 minutes. I want to give you a peek at the most powerful aspect of Bootstrap. And I'm changing things up this semester in the order that we do it. So I want you to use Bootstrap for the midterm project. So that's why we're practicing it right now. But I saved an in-depth discussion about grid layout for after the midterm. But I'm going to bring it up because you really do need, if you're building a Bootstrap page, you kind of need to learn how to use a grid. So despite my best efforts, we're going to talk about it a little bit tonight and probably next week as well. If we go into the layout section of the Bootstrap documentation, they show you how you can lay out parts of a page. We've talked about different designs in Web 1 in the past about how you can have main content and then a nav bar on the side. Bootstrap gives you some classes and some utilities to make a design that is complex and yet responsive so that it looks great on desktop with a lot of content, but then as you shrink it down, the content restacks on top of itself. And you get to choose how wide things are using CSS classes. The power and the reason that it looks so well organized is that it's based upon a grid system. And we're gonna do a lot more research about grids in the future. But if I show you some examples here, I think you'll get a feel for it. Let me see if I can find the grid page. Where is the 12-column grid? Okay, so Bootstrap. No, this is not the right image. Where is the 12-column grid? Here we go. Bootstrap has built into it this concept of a 12-column grid. And then there's actually more than one 12-column grid going on. For every screen size that Bootstrap has pre-built viewport tags for, or viewport classes for, it provides you 12 columns that content can go in. And you can actually tell Bootstrap, you can use specific Bootstrap classes to say, hey, this content that we're looking at, the main content needs to be 8 columns wide, and then we're going to use the remaining 4 columns for the nav bar. But it's always a total of 12 columns. So if I show you this example here, we are on the medium screen size right now. If I zoom out, it'll probably change. But on the medium size, we're saying that this thing right here is 4 columns wide. The middle column is 4 columns wide, and the third column is 4 columns wide. So it's like having a 3-column design where everything's equal column. Now notice how there's actually this col 6. This is for smaller screens. If I shrink this down, come on, how far does it have to go? Maybe I have to zoom out. Now I've lost them. Where is it? response, mix and match. Okay, so here's the 3-column one. I'm shrinking it. Why? Yeah, maybe this is something we'll have to wait until next week to do. But the way that the size classes are supposed to work is you can say that on a small screen, something is supposed to be half the width wide, but then on a bigger screen, it doesn't need to be a half because that would be really hard to read. It'd be so wide. It can be 4 columns wide, which would be a third of the 12 columns that are available. So I'm going to do some more reviewing and come up with some better examples. Their documentation site confuses me because I would have expected that column 6 would be the size, the mobile first size. So on like a mobile device, this would be 1/2 wide. But I might be misinterpreting what this example is supposed to do. No, look, this comment even says that columns start at 50% wide on mobile and bump up to 33% wide on desktop. So yeah, let's steal this code, put it in, and reopen up our hello world. Oh, I guess it did switch over. Maybe I wasn't paying attention to the way the color coding was working. Let's go back. Okay, yeah, so there are 3 columns here total, right? Before they were side by side, all 3 of them, but now they're taking up half of the width on this smaller screen size. So how do you get a feel for how this works? A lot of trial and error, yes, as you can see right now. But keep in mind that the size of grids that are available to you, they're based on viewport tags. So if I go into the overview of this layout page, you'll see that they have these responsive breakpoints. There are no... If you're trying to design for the mobile screen size, the super skinny size, that's considered the extra small screen size, like portrait phones, anything that's narrower than 576 pixels. That's what the COL prefix is for. That just means the normal columns on mobile. If you rotate your phone left, or you have like a vertical iPad, that's this small screen size. They write the media queries for you. They actually build their classes with this viewport query tag, min width of 576. Those classes are col-sm, small. That's the prefix they use, and then how many columns you want it to be. So you'll get a feel for these viewport screen sizes that Bootstrap gives you just by practicing with it. So I'm going to plan on talking more about the Bootstrap grid in next week's live stream. When you work on the Bootstrap challenge, I really want you to focus, I said, on number 1, which is really number 1 and number 2. Number 4, getting a bunch of content styled with normal HTML tags and a few CSS classes that Bootstrap provides you. And number 5 here with code highlighting. I think that will get you started. I think just from tonight's live stream, you're also well prepared to build an HTML table, build potentially a form, although the form design will require you to understand some of that grid. You can probably put a button on there now, and if you play with responsive images and nav bars, you will be ahead of the game. So that's it for tonight's live stream. If there are no other questions, I'm going to sign off and drink the rest of this tea. Have fun with Bootstrap. I am really curious how the independent learning goes, so make sure you take notes along the way and tell me what you learned. If you have questions or if you want to talk about Bootstrap, that's what our Slack chat room is for. I said it once before the semester, but we're a very tiny class. I still want there to be a good discussion in Slack. So I know many of you are contacting me directly. Feel free, because there's not a lot of other people, to just put it in the class channel, and we can start a discussion about Bootstrap. Because I'm professing my love for Bootstrap today, because next week when we do the live stream, I'm going to come to you with the confession that I don't use Bootstrap for new projects. But it's still good. All right. Good night, everybody.